see you.
I'm good. How are you doing? Let me turn up my volume so I can hear you properly. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm adjusting and trying to get in the frame here,
Oh, for
but I
sure.
think you can see me.
Yes. Yeah, take all the time you
This is
need.
fun.
We got plenty of time. No rush. How's your week been so far?
My week has been it's been full. We had
Yeah.
a full moon yesterday, and um yeah, I've been editing videos and trainings and just getting prepared for the year.
Yeah,
Have
I
a
saw
big year ahead.
you just announced your some of the things you've been working on, which I'm super excited to talk to you more about. So I bet
Yeah.
you've been busy.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
Well, I'm gonna give it about 5 minutes before we get into the really interesting stuff. Just hopefully some people
Sure.
will kind of show up, but it's good to see your face again. And
Yeah, you too.
yeah,
I'm loving the hair.
thank you.
Yeah,
I
looks great.
I don't know. It's every day the new day. But
I
yeah.
understand. I know it well.
I've really been
I gave in and just cut my own hair.
oh yeah. I've really been embracing my inner Ramona Flowers recently. Um,
Mm.
my One of my partners went to Florida for most of the holidays, and he had just come back from visiting somewhere for Thanksgiving, and my hair was different when he left, and then he came back and it was
Mm.
new, and then when he came back from Florida, it was different again. He was just like, "All right, cool, sure, whatever."
Always changing. It's the creative genius, queer genius.
I think that's one of our strengths, just as a community, is we have solid hair.
This is true. And very creative. It's one of the things that I wanted to bring up today because it's a huge part of my work
Yeah.
is around embracing that creativity, that creative spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Awesome. Oh, my cat might.
Oh, you're wearing your new earrings.
Yeah. So I've got the fairy one, and then this is one that I bought years ago when I was doing drag.
Hmm.
Hades.
Is that a stone?
Ugh.
Oh,
So it's resin.
okay. It
Yeah.
looks heavy.
It's light. Yeah, resin's pretty comfy. Um, but yeah, somebody that was performing was also doing resin art, and they're an artist. I still follow them on Twitter, but they're not performing much anymore. But yeah, so and then actually, I'm also wearing a this iron ginkgo leaf that was made
Oh,
by
beautiful.
somebody local.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
I think there's
we got
somebody I
somebody.
know. Yeah. Pretty sure that's someone from my school.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started, and I'm sure some people will join later. So, why don't you start off? Well, first, I want to start off by saying that I want this to be a safe and comfortable space for everybody. So, if at any point there's a question you don't want to answer, that's perfectly okay.
Mhm.
And in general, I'm not gonna ask you a sensitive question that isn't about something you've already brought up. So if there's something
Okay.
that I know about you that you don't necessarily want to talk about on this platform, unless you bring it up in this conversation, I'm not going to bring it up. Do you have any other addendums to that or any requests?
No,
Okay.
I trust you and I trust the space.
Yeah. Awesome. So why don't you start off by talking a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Um,
Um,
well, the first and most important thing I can say
mhm.
is that I am a parent to many little furry critters. Oh, well, I guess my name is kind of important too. I'm Liberty.
Mhm.
No, you say them pronouns. That's important as well. Um, but my fur family is my life.
Mhm.
And I'm growing a little human critter in my body right now. So that's kind of pretty pretty notable thing about me. Um, that you would notice if you saw me in person. I love being on the online platform though because I can just kind of dip out of some of those awkward situations and misgendering and questions and all of that.
Yeah.
So it's been nice. But yeah, I mean, as far as like my work in the world, um I I guess I could say one of the most like transformative moments in my work was about 10 years ago when the Occupy movement came to my home city of Portland.
Mhm.
And I was an activist before that, but kind of low key, just like around my community, my neighborhood. And Occupy really opened my eyes wide to the world of community organizing and street activism. And I started the Occupy Portland Library, which is a project that went through many iterations through the years, and actually recently did some field work around what has become called the Liberatory Library, which is sort of an iteration of that work, compiling community works. And there's going to be a website launched later this year
Super exciting.
around that. So yeah, it's kind of cool to see like the blossoming of that work a decade later. But I got into coaching and actually became a yoga instructor
Mhm.
along the way as I kind of my activism and spirituality kind of evolved together. And spent some time in an eco village where I was yoga instructor and a creative coach and a community communication teacher.
Mhm.
So I did a lot of like festivals, workshops, and um, teaching in that kind of environment around community relationships. And that was like I was polyamorous at the time, but I wasn't like out
Yeah.
as genderqueer.
Mhm.
So so my work wasn't really focused in the queer community as well. Although the eco village I was living in was pretty much predominantly queer witches,
Mhm.
and so that environment like allowed me to come out, and it was a really magical time,
That's wonderful.
so to speak.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I would consider that kind of my home community back in Portland. Um, but once I came out, everything kind of shifted in my business. Like I
Yeah.
really started focusing on like I wanted to work with queer people. So my
Yeah.
clients were predominantly queer. Um, we spent a lot of time working on issues around like creativity. That was sort of my focus, was helping queer activists and community organizers to kind of balance that that like active contribution to community and the regenerative creative part of themselves. So
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that work. I thought I wanted to go deeper into like individual work, so I went to counseling school and found that individual psychology is not so much where it's at for me. Um,
Fair.
Community approaches to healing felt really salient and real. You know, coming from as the community organizer, knowing how profound those community uh, moments can be
Mhm.
when we're working together, collaborating, getting into conflict, transforming through conflict, can be, very impactful and healing collectively. So I went into a community liberation psychology program,
Yeah,
which
I'm
is
aware of that.
something I'm still working on today.
Yeah.
But it's been such an arc. Like, I've gone through such a transformation over the years. Like, I started my business in 2014, came out in 2016. In 2017, got like super into racial justice organizing and co-founded an organization around this like racist incident that happened in my hometown. And that work brought me all around doing racial justice organizing. And then I moved to Missouri, where I got involved in reparations organizing and co-organized an event in Ferguson around Michael Brown's 5th anniversary of being murdered by police. So that was pretty amazing and intense, and really opened my eyes to both like the incredible healing that can happen in a community, and like the power of people who are coming together around a shared experience and a shared struggle.
Yeah.
It also really it impacted my, well, I saw how easy it was for folks to burn out.
Yeah.
Like that is very real in the activist community. And like people go strong and hard and are passionate, and then like can't sustain the work, and or get into conflict. There's a lot of like infighting, and those relationships get really strained. So I started looking more at like activist burnout and gaining skills for interpersonal relationships and being able to manage conflict when it comes up. Not just, with people who are opposing you in your views or in your positionality, but who you're sharing work with.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of more of my focus now, is getting people the skills
Yeah.
to sustain the work, both like the holistic well-being awareness of like, when do I need to take a break?
Yeah.
How do I develop good boundaries with activism work, and arguing with racists on social media, and all the things that can come up that need to be balanced with good care, community care, and self-care. So another piece of that is doing anti-racist organizing. I noticed in myself, like, I wasn't spending enough time immersed in the queer community, and spent a lot of my energy educating people about my positionality, and it didn't feel like a good place for that to happen. Like, there's a time and a place for educating people about being genderqueer, and I wanted to do more of that. I felt like that was really, I had a passion for it, and could also see how much is needed, both because a lot of people who are doing like anti-oppression work or diversity, inclusion, equity kind of work often don't have an education in anything related to queer people.
Yeah.
Like, obviously it's not being taught in a lot of schools, and highly contentious. So like that education will often fall onto diversity consultants who more often than not don't know anything about it. So don't know anything about us. So I'm like, okay, there's definitely a gap here, and I enjoy filling that gap.
Yeah.
So so that's kind of what brings me to today of like, I have the communication piece. I do like communication trainings and coaching and conflict facilitation trainings, queer inclusion trainings and coaching, and kind of like a more holistic well-being aspect of coaching as well. So yeah, that's me. That's Liberty.
That's awesome. Yeah, you have a wide variety of skills that are needed in the community and on behalf of the community, which is just wonderful to hear about the work that you're doing. Let me. I sort of had a few questions. So
I do want to just say I moved to Missouri in at a very interesting time.
yes.
In the year before the pandemic. So I kind of like hit the ground running with reparations work. I didn't spend a lot of time like meeting new people, and aside from like being in it, like on the ground, like in the streets, which is where I've met most of my lifelong friends. But then the pandemic hit, and it was just this strange like separation. So while I feel like I'm getting to know people in St. Louis, I still feel very new, even though I've been here for more than 3 years. So it's just a strange, a dance, strange
Right,
little
yeah, kind of
relational dance to the place.
Do you feel like, or I guess I should say, how has that informed the work that you've been doing, if that makes sense? Like coming from Portland to here, are there differences that you want to talk about, or like?
Well, one thing I can say is that I've always sort of been a global citizen in a sense. Like when I was younger, I was an exchange student and a youth ambassador. So I spent a lot of time immersed in very diverse groups of global people, people from around the globe. So I feel very comfortable working with folks across distance, both like physical distance and cultural distance. And so when the pandemic came around, even though I was really yearning for that like in-person connection with St. Louis and the place and making this my home, I was ready to adapt to that world. And so I work with people from all over the world, all over the country, all of the time zones, from Hawaii to the East Coast, and even people in Europe and Israel, and meeting people from all over every day. You never know who's going to come into the Zoom room. It's kind of cool.
That's really cool. Yeah.
There's strange things about it, or like some things that can feel disconnecting or discombobulating because we're not being rooted in a shared place.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, we get that richness and that wisdom from all of these different perspectives of humanity. Like, it's been amazing to meet queer people from New Zealand, like Indigenous New Zealand, who are, have this like perspective about being gender nonconforming, or they're they use different language, have Indigenous language to describe their perspective. It's not actually about, like, gender isn't a concept in the same way as we relate to it in the United States or in the Western world, but like to have access to that is so deeply affirming.
Yeah.
It that like we came up with language to describe our experience
Mhm.
here and now, but that it is such an ancient way of being human to
Yeah.
be
Gender
whatever you want to call
affirming
it.
of our community.
Free,
Yeah,
free to express ourselves and like just be human in whatever form that takes
exactly.
without it being a binary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing.
So,
Sorry, what were you gonna say?
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh,
I'm just marveling at being able to recall these, yeah, these different experiences I've had because of the pandemic.
yeah.
You know, that's been granted to, um, I've been granted the privilege of being in these spaces
Mhm.
because, you know, I would never, otherwise, I would never have had access to that.
Mhm.
So that's pretty cool outcome.
Sure. Yeah. I have a partner that is moving in with me in March that I met because of the pandemic. So
Mm.
um,
Hmm.
it's been just in general as far as connection, like COVID has made some interesting things, connecting more globally. Anyway, one thing that I did want to hopefully dive in pretty deep with is if somebody is watching this and shares the vision of a community that is resilient with conflict and takes care of our activists, um, what is there a first step that you would suggest for that person
Mm.
or group of people?
Um, in general, or like in relationship to what I do, or
Um, whatever, however you best want to interpret that.
okay. um,
I mean, obviously, like you
well,
have courses that would help, but like,
right, right, yeah. But in terms of like just in general, if someone is in conflict in their community, and like oftentimes people will come to me because they're in conflict. Like usually
yeah.
folks wait until there's a problem.
Mhm.
Generally we have a problem, you know, pain arises in our life in some way and we're like, oh, I need some help,
Yeah.
which is great. And I encourage people to seek that support, and gain tools both for grounding, so that like we as individuals know ourselves well enough that we know like, oh, I'm getting activated by this conversation, like I need to create a boundary here, or I need to take some time, I need to get my nervous system regulated again,
Mhm.
um, so that I can engage in a compassionate and humanizing way,
Mhm.
because I think it's really common for us to get activated, and I use the word activated as opposed to triggered because you know there's distinctions there
Yeah.
between being in a trauma state and just being a human being who is having emotions,
Right.
which we're all going to have.
Yeah.
And so few of us are taught good tools for coping when those feelings come up. And so to gain that self-awareness and to know what to do for yourself when
Yeah.
you're activated in relationship to somebody else can be like a really powerful first step. And what I kind of encourage people to do is like, that's the first step to conflict facilitation, is
Yeah.
knowing how to care for yourself, give yourself empathy, and regulate your own reactions and responses. And then gain some tools for how to extend that compassion, that empathy, or that co-regulation
Mhm.
to another person who might be activated. So I kind of say, you know, it's like you want to put your oxygen mask on first
Yeah.
before helping others. So I have two of my courses are kind of designed. One of them is for self-connection, self-empathy, and getting connected to your own needs and being able to express those. Um, and the other course is about gaining the tools for what? Then how do I engage in relationship with other people so that so I can extend my compassion to them and we can find some way to share reality again.
Yeah.
Uh, so, and then beyond that, that also that training is called empathic communication across difference.
Mm-hmm.
We learn tools for like how to engage a group in that process. So if you're a facilitator or a community organizer or manager or whatever, and you have two people who are going at it with each other,
Yeah.
what do you do? What do you say? Like a lot of people kind of like, like try to shut it down or like, we're not going to talk about that or like go to HR or whatever.
Yeah.
And that dismissal of the conflict can be one super dehumanizing. Like,
Yeah.
what, do my needs not matter to you? Like, especially when it comes to issues of that involve any type of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
It hurts so much to be told again, like, we're not going to deal with that here. And breaks bonds of trust and is generally death to community. We can't engage those feelings in the moment and work through them together and see them to the other side. So that's what that training is for, is getting, some practice and like facing those really tense moments. And then what can you say? How do you get people to come together and talk to each other?
Yeah.
So
I'm definitely interested in
yeah.
that. I think that's super valuable, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to talk about anything specific in the community, but I've seen a need for it.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
some organizations that are doing really good work, but are
Mm-hmm.
run by humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
run by humans with unfinished stories and unresolved hurt.
yeah.
And when we let it just play out over and over again, it is, like I said, it's death to community. Which is part of the process. Why I call it conflict facilitation and not conflict resolution is because some conflicts are not resolved. Sometimes we cannot come together, we cannot heal in a relationship where there isn't the space for that type of healing to happen.
Yeah.
Or it's just not the environment for it. And a lot of couples counselors will joke like, I'm here to help you break up. Because sometimes that's what needs to happen. It's, not every conflict is resolvable. So to be able to facilitate it and hold it so that it moves on to its next phase of transformation is really what a conflict facilitator does.
What are some of the healthy outcomes if there is a conflict that can't be resolved?
What are some of the outcomes if a conflict cannot be resolved? I think that an outcome that we hope for is, if anything, is awareness about our needs.
Yeah.
And what a conflict facilitator or a mediator would do in a situation with a group that's in conflict or two people that are in conflict is helping each person get really clear about what are you wanting and needing, and are the other people who you're involved with, are they willing to help you meet those needs? And if not, then how do we move forward? What are some strategies for moving forward? So either you can stay in relationship in some way,
Yeah.
or you can get your needs met in some other way. So it's not always, happy ending. It's not always
Right.
the Disney ending that we're hoping for.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a really painful process, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I've seen some, ugly breakups, so to speak, in community and between activists, and I think what my job is as a facilitator is to give people the tools to stay connected to their humanity no matter what the outcome is. Meaning not seeking retaliation, not shaming and smear campaigns, and if possible, calling out abusers was another thing, but trying as much as possible to transform the pain however we have access to.
For sure.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for folks that might be, say, bystanders in the midst of a conflict between activists and community members?
Yeah. I mean, it depends.
Yeah, for
There's
sure.
like a million and one ways that people could be in conflict. But I would say if you're witness to a dialogue that is becoming escalated, heated, blame being thrown or name calling even, there are de-escalation techniques that can be employed as a witness. I think being a bystander is a choice. So I wouldn't call someone a bystander. It's a default. It's like the freeze response.
Yeah.
But we can actually choose to step into being a witness. And as being a witness, from being a witness, you can step into being a facilitator. If there's enough of a relationship between you and somebody else who is part of that conflict, you may be able to step in and say, hey, what I heard you say was that you're feeling this way. And I heard you say that you're feeling this way. And then you kind of have to decide like who goes first, who are you going to invite to go first, and invite to get curious about the other person.
Yeah.
If you can create that space where folks feel like they're being held and witnessed enough that they can start to get curious about the other person, like some magic can happen. Curiosity is like this balm that can de-escalate things very quickly. And even if you're the witness who's offering the curiosity, I heard you say this. Tell me more about what that's like for you, or how that feels when you hear so and so say that they don't, whatever, like you being queer or whatever it is. Giving them a space to express themselves can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, for sure. And I imagine that in order to do that role, like you also have to know yourself and be able to regulate yourself in order to not just add your own activation to that.
Yeah, that's half of the battle. Half of the battle is, being connected to yourself enough that you know when you need to step back, or knowing like, okay, I'm definitely triggered by this transphobic person who is, saying these things to this other person and I want to go at them.
Right.
And if I can just acknowledge that, I can also kind of contain it, bracket it, and set it aside for a moment so that I can be present as a facilitator. I can be more of a clear conduit between the two people who are having the conflict, and try to, hold the space so that um, they can engage each other and feel like they're being held in that process. Because if it then becomes about my feelings, I've just added a whole other element of complexity that can escalate the situation. Even though, I'm like, my needs and my feelings are important, but I also have this superpower and this gift to give somebody else when I'm able to set those just like over here, not like ignoring my needs.
Right.
But part of the need is to see the community be held in the process of transforming pain, because my pain is transformed in that process as well. Yeah. It's some Jedi moves. It's definitely some like emotional magic that happens, but with a lot of practice and being in it and sitting in the heat.
Yeah, build a little bit of tolerance to it. In my work, I volunteer on a peer support helpline, and part of that was a training of just skills, scripts essentially of what support to give. I imagine there are similar things in conflict facilitation that you teach in your course, I'm guessing. Awesome. Yeah. Tell me about the PhD program that you are currently engaged in.
Yeah. It's a doozy.
Yeah.
It is not your average PhD program. I'll say that much. I would say that the program that I'm in is very niche-y, and there aren't many like it. And why I say that is because they are not afraid to take on the thought experiment, I guess is the word, to take on the task of decoloniality.
Yeah.
And decolonizing education from within the institution, which may or may not be possible, is what I'm finding, because those ivory tower walls can be thick and stubborn. But what I can say is that there are people and there are professors and there are staff who are taking on the task, and they're trying. And that's very encouraging, because I've been in educational spaces my whole life, and as a neurodivergent person, a lot of those spaces have been very painful and confining and deadening. And this program isn't afraid to go there. And although they still have some racist tendencies and some transphobic tendencies and ableist tendencies, it all shows up there still.
Sure.
There is space to talk about it, and that's part of why we're there, is to engage that inquiry, and to engage in liberation. Really, that is the focus of the program, is community liberation psychology from a depth psychology lens. So we're the depth psychology part of it is working with held in the unconscious, both
Okay.
the individual and the collective unconscious. So, what is in the shadow? What is being unseen, not talked about, marginalized? That is the depths. So we go there.
Yeah. It feels like it lines up perfectly with your work in conflict facilitation as well. It sounds like there's a lot of messy conversations that are had in that program as
Yeah.
well.
Sometimes it can get intense for sure. But what it's also yielded, I think, is a lot of really um, brave work from people who are going into their communities and engaging in um, these transformative practices, whether that's like street activism or maintaining indigenous murals in the inner city, or whatever it is from each person's positionality. I've seen some really incredible projects come out of that program, and I'm working on one. Hopefully, I'm
Yeah.
pursuing the realm of queer liberation through creativity as my dissertation focus. And I don't know what that's going to look like yet. I'm still kind of right at the beginning, um, but I'm excited to find out because I know, like, the queer community is so brilliant and vibrant, and I'm like constantly in awe of what is being expressed through queer hands and bodies and minds. I just want, like, I want to just like bathe in it
Oh, I know.
like all the time. I'm like, how do I make this my life and like my focus and my intellectual work, and like highlight that brilliance and amplify it, both as a way my to validate us as like valid knowledge creators, um, but also to make that to step out of this like damage centered narrative about queer people
Yeah.
as broken or mentally ill or whatever it is that gets kind of centered as the narrative, and be like, actually, I mean, some of those things are true. Like, yeah, the pain and stuff is there, but like that is not the whole of who
It's not
we
the whole story.
are and like why we're here on Earth. So actually, we're fucking like blowing sparkles out of our asses, and it's the best thing ever. So everyone needs some of that.
Absolutely. I have, got on TikTok recently with Triangle Wellness, and um, it's been a little bit overwhelming almost that there's so many queer and trans people on there that just want to put good things in the world and want to educate and just want to make the world a better place for other people, and I'm getting a little emotional talking about it, but yeah,
Yeah,
queer people are amazing.
yeah, it's rich community, rich with so many beautiful things to offer ourselves and the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, big
Can
heart.
you tell me a bit about what your like creativity support looks like as well? Because I know you do a bit of that as well, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I mean, creativity support. Um,
If that's the
I
proper
would
phrasing.
say, well, no, I appreciate you phrasing it that way because it gives me pause for a moment just to reflect that, like, just us being alive is a creative act,
Mm-hmm.
and being nourished and thriving is at baseline a creative act. I guess from my like pregnant perspective, I'm like, yeah, we're just like I don't have to do anything to be creative. I just sit here
Right.
and breathe and like I really want to amplify that message first and foremost as a perspective about creativity
Mhm.
because I feel like creativity has been commodified as this thing that we do,
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
activity that we engage in, as opposed to part of who we are innately
Mhm.
as beings. So it's really more about getting in touch with your creative being. Um, and from that place, it touches everything that that I teach and the other realms of coaching,
Yeah.
which are more about gaining skills to put that creativity to use. So communication, for example,
Yeah.
like we've been taught all these scripts and these narratives and these programs
Mhm.
for how to communicate with people.
Mhm.
Um, and most of the time they're kind of dead. Like English is sort of a dead language, but we speak it, so we have to get creative with it
Yeah.
and to be able to actually express the life that's coming out of us. And so through getting in touch with our kind of our essence, our feeling essence, like what are we feeling, what are we needing, we can get creative about how to get those needs met, how to express those feelings,
Mhm.
as opposed to running the old circuits. So from that perspective, I guess I engage creativity from in all parts of my work,
Mhm.
but in a more tangible sense, um, like I have tools and activities and games and exercises and stuff that I engage with people to get more in touch with themselves that involve like drawing out your inner counsel, for example,
Mhm. Okay.
giving voice to the different voices and spirits who guide us and um, as they sort of a self-knowing exercise. So that's just a little an example of how that can show up in coaching. But um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say creativity and why my business is called Awakening Creatives is because it creativity is the kind of the nest that envelops everything that I do.
Yeah.
I hope
And
that made sense. Those are a bunch of
no, it
English
definitely
words
did. And
together.
I really like the fact that you mentioned like creativity being commodified, and it sounds like you in your work you really separate that idea of like creativity is not like a side hustle or something that you do, it's something that you do period or and something that you do for money, but it's just allowing your being to breathe and be and reach its full potential, um, which is warms my little gay heart. So,
It takes the pressure off
yeah,
of having to be a producer. Which I also, I've worked with lots of creatives who are, dancers, photographers, artists in whatever manner. Um, I'm also a musician. I'm sitting here on Melody Lane. Like I'm definitely not like against people going out there and expressing their hearts out in whichever medium, and I support that as well. Um, Most of the creatives that I work with also happen to be activists in some way, or are the the spirit of the artist is so tuned in to the pain of the world and the change that needs to happen. So those always seem to go together. And yeah, I love my people.
yeah, for sure. And I think there's a benefit to the world for um, everyone to understand their potential to be creative and like um, I feel like it's a pretty common narrative that people had like a mean art teacher, and then they just grew up with a narrative that I'm not creative, I'm not good enough to do this thing,
I'm
and
not an artist.
right, exactly.
And I call bullshit.
Yes.
I call bullshit on that, because we are all born singing, we're all born expressing, we're all born dancing.
Yeah.
That is like innate to the human being. And indigenous cultures throughout time and history have had all of these different ways to allow people to express themselves and to engage in the creative act of life that we have been trained out of in this sort of post-colonial era, and why I believe there's so much addiction and mental unwellness and disease in general, because we've stopped dancing and singing and reciting poetry in ceremony together, and those are the things that we need to stay in connection to this creative life force.
Yeah.
So like finding our way back to that is vital to our survival, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's creativity shows up in other ways than just traditional, like art, singing, all of that. I briefly was a scientist, and there's creativity in that field and research of like you're putting together ideas that supposedly no one ever has before. So yeah, there's just everyone has so much creative potential, and
absolutely in every medium.
So we have about 8 more minutes until 8:30. I know I had mentioned speaking with an hour for you. Are there any closing thoughts that you want to dive into?
Closing thoughts. Wow.
Or if you want to, if there's anything in particular you want to promote. Yeah.
Well, promote. Actually, while we're on the topic of creativity, I do have the liberatory care coloring book that was a project that came out of the pandemic. This was one of the things when the pandemic started that I'm like, okay, I'm stuck in my house and everyone's afraid to go out. I need to be in queer community. Like, it's an essential need. So how do I do that in a place where I don't hardly know anyone yet? And I put the call out on social media saying like, I want to put this project together, and was able to convene 12 artists from around the world, predominantly queer and all queer and or BIPOC folks, including some indigenous artists, and we all sat together on Zoom and we dreamed about what is liberatory care from in your community. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? And each of the artists dreamt on their own experience and came up with an image that all got compiled into this book, and it turned out pretty amazing. The opening, this is the first image. I don't know if you can see it, but
yeah,
I love this image so much. It is so cozy and gender ambiguous, and you're like, I just want to be in there, like sitting on the floor with them, painting and getting massage. It just makes me feel good. And so this is a project that is out there, and I have another publication that is more about getting into your own depths. It's a dream depths and dreams journal. So you can record your sleep time dreams, your daytime dreams, your musings, meanderings, wonderings, and as a way to get in touch with what's happening under the surface. And outside of that, I just launched my whole lineup of 2022 services and offerings, including a couple of self-guided trainings that I'm pretty excited about. There's a queer, it's called Including Queer People. It's really like, I think queer people would find it amusing, or validating, affirming. But it's really designed for diversity trainers and families of queer people and, teams, businesses, teams, organizations who need a training on how to use they, them pronouns and like things not to say, kind of like a 101. And I think it's pretty fun and cute. It's a nice way to get people into learning about queer people without like the guilt and shame of having done it wrong, which I think makes it hard for some folks to want to engage because they're like, oh, I'm gonna mess up and it's just like a fun learning space for people to play around with and also drop some real stats. Be like, actually, using someone's pronouns saves lives, and you should do it. So, let's be real. So yeah, there's that, and then there's a live, like an extended live version of that where people can come and ask questions and learn about chromosomes and the science of behind the non-binary world and experience, that I think like that education is just so severely lacking in our world. So there's a space for it. So send your grandma.
Absolutely. Rachel of Earth Body STL asked if you have any book recommendations, anything that's inspired you.
Oh man. You're talking to the person who started the Liberatory Library. So
you're like, oh boy.
Yes.
You're like, yes, I do.
That's rabbit hole. I am excited to finally get the Liberatory Library website off of the ground this year. We got a grant for it last year, and it just, the pandemic makes everything difficult. So it's been a slow start, but there will be lots of book recommendations on there, and like links to other people's libraries and databases and stuff that are you wouldn't find in your library. So I'm really excited about that. But oh my gosh, I'm looking at my books. I'm like, there's a million. In terms of like conflict facilitation, I do want to acknowledge my my teacher, Le Munois, who is a diversity trainer and teaches the mindful facilitation technique, which is he's a Chinese man, and he teaches from a Buddhist perspective around facilitating conflict as if it were kind of almost like a martial art.
Yeah.
And that perspective has been very grounding for me, as opposed to like a very heady, like intellectual, like let's figure out this conflict sort of perspective. And he gets really, he's really all about like truth telling and getting real. allowing people the space to tell their story and to express themselves and making invitations for that to happen. And he has several books out. One, Art of Mindful Facilitation, Let's Get Real, which is a conversation, a series of conversations between white people and people of color. So those are some good ones. I mean, of course, bell hooks.
Yes.
Shout out to bell hooks. And oh my gosh, yeah, if you have specific questions, like I could go in 1,000 directions when it comes to
For sure.
books. I love books.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming and chat with me. For anybody that missed, earlier portions of this, it will be on our Patreon, and I will be posting, a few key clips here and there. So yeah, otherwise check out Liberty's work at Awakening Creatives. We are at Triangle Wellness Collective. Any final thoughts before we?
I'm just really excited for you all and what you're doing and starting. I know you're at the beginning of a big journey, and the beginning can feel overwhelming and
Yes.
like there's a lot. And I guess I just want to say, like, I started my business in 2014, so I'm like creeping up on a decade here in a couple years, and I feel like I've gone through such a big transformation in that time, and like really honed in on who I am and what I'm good at and what I have to offer. And that process can take time, and like it's been a lot of trials and errors and like many mistakes, many failings, many flops. So don't give up. Just
Appreciate that.
that is part of the creative process, is like a million like bad versions, and then like this jewel comes out and you're like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful.
I appreciate
So
that.
I know, I see you're already doing that.
Thank you.
And I love what you're doing, and everyone should sign up for the Patreon because it's a cozy little space. I feel very welcomed and at home in there. So
Yeah. And we did just change things so that for the most, like everything, all tiers have all access. The lowest tier being $3 if that's what is comfortable for you, up to 15 if that is something you feel like you have to give. So thank you for the shout out. And again, thank you for coming to chat with me.
yeah, thank you so much for the invitation.
I hope you have
Great
a
to
good
be
night.
here. See you later.